CDC reports 276 new cases of COVID-19 in 15 states of the Federation.
FCT Ministerial Task Team on COVID-19 intercepts 29 commercial motorcyclists bound for Lagos.
National Assembly commends presidential decision to audit operations of Niger Delta Development Commission.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss COVID-19, conduct of Edo and Ondo State elections.
All right, now some Nigerians, particularly those in Edo and Ondo states, have been expressing some concern, both online and in the mainstream media, about the challenges of the elections in the states in September and October this year, while the coronavirus still rages. Now, these concerns have increased with also the rising number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 being recorded in both states as well as across Nigeria.
And that's indeed on a daily basis. And to allay some of these fears, the Independent Electoral Commission has worked on and released a policy on the conduct of elections in the context of COVID-19. This document is to serve as a guide in handling the challenges of conducting the Ondo and the Edo state governorship elections in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, indeed, Kyria, the policy addresses some of the basic issues relating to the health challenges that COVID-19 poses to the electoral process. Now, the policy also covers legal matters, the planning of elections, electoral operations with regard to pre-election and election day activities at the polling units, voter education and engagement of stakeholders, political parties, and election observation. Now, other aspects also covered include the critical role of ICT and voter registration, as well as the growing demand for the use of technology in elections in the country.
And some of these guidelines for voters will include the provision of infrared thermometers at collation centers, mandatory use of face masks, provision of face masks for all electoral officers, provision of alcohol-based sanitizers at polling centers, and the disinfection of smart card readers after the fingerprint of each voter is read.
And as INEC fine-tunes these measures in order to boost public confidence in the planned electoral process, meetings have been scheduled with resident electoral commissioners, political parties, and indeed other stakeholders. Now, these engagements will culminate in a press briefing scheduled for the 3rd of June. Now, how steep is the cost implication to INEC in conducting elections under the coronavirus pandemic? And how does INEC intend to effectively monitor voters to ensure that the safety guidelines are followed at polling units and indeed at the collation centers? We have answers to these questions and more in the course of the program, where, of course, we'll have our guests. It's on that note, we'd like to welcome you to today's edition of Good Morning Nigeria. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I am Kyria Umayo. We thank you so much for joining us on the program, reaching you live, as always, from the network service of the NTA. Today is May 27th, and it is a pleasure to wish all the children out there a happy Children's Day. Kingsley, those days during Children's Day, it's a major activity day for children, always done with their pomp and circumstance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you had a march past, and then you also had the feast after the march past.
Exactly,
Yes,
and the preparations alone is
absolutely
a
very excited. But of course, under the corona pandemic, we don't expect to see any of that. But the children, of course, will be happy in their own way. A number of states have allowed eateries and restaurants to operate only on a takeaway basis.
Yes.
So those who would like to have their ice cream or little treats should have them. Just tell your mom and dad that you go to that particular restaurant or eatery, pick it up, and then return home. So that you'll be safe.
And you have to do that, of course, knowing that there is COVID-19.
Absolutely.
You have to obey the measures. Now, following our usual tradition on Good Morning Nigeria, we have to bring you the complimentary segments who will make up the entire package. For now, let's join Abd Malika Dio for the morning news. Hello, Abdul Malik.
Good morning, Kieran, and good morning, Kingsley. It's good to have you join us on the morning news. Now, at 11:30 p.m. on 26 May 2020, the Nigerian Center for Disease Control (NCDC) announced 276 new cases of COVID-19 in the country, increasing the number of confirmed cases to 8,344. The 276 new confirmed cases are spread across 15 states of the Federation, with 161 in Lagos, 36 in Rivers, 27 in Edo, 19 in Kaduna, 10 in Nasarawa, 6 in Oyo, and 4 in Kano State. There are 3 new cases in Delta, Ebonyi, with 2 in Gombe, while Ogun, Ondo, Borno, Abia, and Bauchi State have 1 case each. In total, Lagos tops the chart of COVID-19 cases with 3,756, followed by Kano, 923, and the Federal Capital Territory with 519 cases. The NCDC report that 2,385 discharged patients with 249 deaths recorded so far. In continuation of its daily monitoring and enforcement of the interstate travel ban, the FCT Ministerial Task Team on COVID-19 has intercepted and arrested 29 Lagos-bound commercial motorcycles traveling in a truck.
How did you manage from Taraba or Lafia to reach where our men arrested you here?
Sincerely, I consider one from God.
Now from God, how God took you?
Tough. As they don't stop me now, that's why I passed.
Very, very despicable. We have seen persons being carried in between fertilizers, being carried in between bags of beans, in between bags of pepper, in between bags of onions, in between bags of tomatoes, in very, very dehumaning conditions. And we found that really very worrisome. As we go to enforce this and as we enforce this, what we feel in our heart is pain.
The Anambra and Delta State government are working out modalities to reduce the human and vehicular traffic on the Niger Bridge, violating the interstate movement restriction put in place by the federal government to contain the spread of the coronavirus. This followed a meeting of delegations by the 2 states at the bridgehead Asaba.
2 things we need to address. We need to address the pedestrian traffic and then also the vehicular traffic. The interstate lockdown is still in place, but the peculiarities of this area means that we have to look at it slightly differently.
If the borders, if data borders with Edo are manned very effectively, if you do that, the trucks that come into Delta will be just trucks that you have cleared.
An Ekiti State government has signed a memorandum of understanding for improved internet access for socio-economic development of the state. Governor Kayode Fayemi said in Ado Ekiti that the project will increase the state internet access from its present 16% to 90% internet penetration.
Our pupils in schools can very easily do their assignments online, submit it online, get it graded online, get their results online without leaving the confines of their homes.
Go online to use your internet, to use fast internet. I'm sure a lot of us have been hearing of 5G. There can never be 5G without fiber. There is no 4G without fiber. But with fiber, it is the soul of the internet technology.
The House of Representatives says the National Assembly fully support the presidential decision to carry out a forensic audit of the operations of the Niger Delta Development Commission, NDDC, from 2001 to 2019. Chairman of the House Committee and NDDC Representative Olubunmi Tunjojo, while briefing newsmen, says the National Assembly, in line with its constitutional provision, will also go ahead with investigation of alleged financial misappropriation by the Interim Management Committee of the NDDC. Chairman of the committee says the National Assembly will not succumb to alleged blackmail and intimidation orchestrated by the Interim Management Committee.
Accusations are coming because the National Assembly decided to institute a probe after calls and different petitions. And blackmail threats had been used as a weapon to stop the National Assembly. That has not worked. Then the latest one is this issue of sheer blackmail.
And for Shagar schools in Karai local government area of Kano State have benefited from the benevolence of the First Lady Aisha Muhammadu Buhari through her Future Assured initiative with the donation of palliatives. The gesture is geared towards cushioning the effect of the lockdown and to discourage street begging among Almajiris.
Primary concern of Haji Aisha Buhari, the First Lady, to uplift the life of less privileged in the society.
Expressing a sincere gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Her Excellency for this donation.
As the country continues to battle with the coronavirus pandemic, Nigerians have been urged not to lose sight of the harmful effects of measles and other childhood killer diseases. This is the view of media expert expressed at the media orientation meeting for anti-measles campaign organized by the National Orientation Agency in Owerri, the Imo State capital.
In spite of COVID-19 pandemic that had made people to lock themselves up, that there is still need for mothers and other caregivers to go to the primary health centers to assess immunization for their child who have gotten up to a certain age.
The issue of immunization of children remains a routine thing at the primary health care centers situated all over our communities, all over our local government areas.
And that concludes the news highlight for now. Good morning, Nigeria. On COVID-19, conduct of Edo and Ondo elections will continue with Kingsley and Kirian after the break. Many thanks for watching. I'm Abdul Malik Adio.
Main way coronavirus spread is when infected people sneeze and cough. Small droplets of fluid expelled by cough or sneezes are laced with viruses looking for new respiratory tracts to infect. When a sick person sneezes around someone who is healthy, the virus can land in the nose, mouth, or even the eyes, causing an infection. Symptoms can include fever, cough, shortness of breath. Symptoms may appear within 2 to 14 days. Seek medical advice if you develop symptoms and have been in close contact with a person known to have COVID-19, or if you live or have recently been in an area with ongoing spread of COVID-19. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network. In this time of despair, our country, Nigeria, needs us now more than ever. We stand a chance to save our great country, Nigeria. A chance to rise up from this pandemic stronger and better. What will be the gain if we do not learn from other countries and observe the lockdown to stop the further spread of the virus? If we loosen our guards and allow this virus dome our very existence, then what have we gained? This is the call to every Nigerian to unite as one and stop the spread of this deadly virus. Stay at home and stay safe. Remember, the virus doesn't move unless we move. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
Are you aware that your perfect family may be under threat by germs? Germs can cause infectious diseases like diarrhea, typhoid, and flu. These infectious diseases are amongst the biggest killers of adults and children. In Nigeria, tens of thousands of children under the age of 5 have died due to diarrhea caused by germs, which could easily have been prevented. These illness-causing germs are everywhere. Dirty surfaces, on cuts and wounds, on your clothes, in unclean bathing water. To protect your family from germs, use the power of Dettol's 1 capful. For surface cleaning, for first aid, for your laundry, in your bathing water, and to protect your family from up to 100 illness-causing germs. Be Dettol sure.
The number of the COVID-19 cases in Nigeria is increasing daily, with many more tests ongoing. The battle of testing, isolating, treating, and attending to the affected persons rests heavily on the shoulders of our health workers, constantly putting their lives on the line and at risk to contain this virus, save and protect the lives of millions of Nigerians. To these health workers, we at the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, on behalf of millions of Nigerians, say a big thank you for all that you have done and are doing. To the security agencies enforcing the lockdown and every other frontliner, we say thank you for putting your lives on the line to save ours. There is no amount of words that can quantify our gratitude. Thank you. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
Do you not know that our enemies have no face? They are indigents of no state. They come from no place. And if this boat capsizes, every one of us will go under. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer. Do not say, I am the Iroko when the forest is burning. Do not say, I am the Obeche when the forest is burning. Our differences will not stop us from perishing together. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer.
Watching Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now it's time for business news, and we understand that the value of capital importation into Nigeria stood at $5.85 billion in the first quarter of 2020. Let's join our correspondent Abdul Karim Zurmi for details of the story.
The total value of capital importation into Nigeria stood at $5.85 billion in the first quarter of 2020, representing an increase of 53.97% compared to fourth quarter of 2019 and a 31.19% decrease in comparison to the first quarter of 2019. A breakdown of the capital importation show that portfolio investment accounted for 73.61% of total capital importation. Other investment accounted for 22.73%, while foreign direct investment accounted for 3.66% of total capital imported in the first quarter of 2020. Lagos State emerged top destination for capital investment, which accounted for 87.72% of the total capital inflow in the first quarter of 2020. In the meantime, the World Economic Forum has unveiled its class of 2020 young scientists. This represents 25 researchers at the forefront of scientific discovery. Although the challenge of COVID-19 has unintentionally diverted attention away from other research work, the World Economic Forum believes the need for science to test, predict, and explain how different phenomena affect human and ecological outcomes is greater than ever. These brilliant academics, 40 and under, have been selected on the basis of their achievements in expanding the boundaries of knowledge and practical applications of science in issues as diverse as child psychology, chemical oceanography, and artificial intelligence. 8 of this year's young scientists study in Europe, while 7 work in Asia, 6 are based in the Americas, 2 in South Africa, and a further 2 in the Middle East. 15 are women. As the global economy buckles under the burden of the coronavirus pandemic, Alice Hazelton, Program Lead Science and Society of the World Economic Forum, says they are looking forward to working with the young scientists to help leaders from the public and private sector better engage with science, and in doing so, help young researchers become stronger ambassadors for science, which the world needs now and will continue to need post-COVID-19. With business news, Abdul Karim Zermi.
Thank you, Abdul Karim, for the business news. It's now time for us to do a review of today's national dailies.
Our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Tebens, with us on the studios this morning. Bayo, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Kinsley. Good morning. Good morning, Kyria.
Yeah, Bayo, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you.
All right, let's start
with
the Daily Sun newspaper. Daily Sun, just on the right-hand side of the nameplate, it says, governors meet over Buhari's order for state judiciary legislature's financial autonomy. That's on page 6. The lead story on Daily Sun this morning, COVID-19, federal government gives stringent conditions for flight resumption. With 2 riders, passengers to undergo rigorous screening, pay higher fare. FAN bans VIP escort, urges passengers to brace up for delays. It's on page 25. Now, below the photo story here, Masari renews lockdown on Katsina and Daura. That's on page 29. No going back on NDDC probe. That's according to the House of Representatives. Charge federal government to reopen borders, stimulate economy. The full story is on page 8. Now, capital importation into Nigeria stood at $5.8 billion in the first quarter. That's according to NBS. Read more of that on page 25. Abuja task force arrests 29 Lagos-bound commercial motorcyclists. That's on page 4. That's about it all.
Okay, let's take a look at the Nation newspaper. Nation newspaper, above the name flag, it says El-Rufai and Masari extend lockdown. Kaduna and Katsina remain shut. El-Rufai is governor of Kaduna, Masari, governor of Katsina State. Now, governors to take position on financial autonomy. That's page 5 in greater detail. Chinese club offers Igalo 180 million naira weekly. Man U loan ends in 6 days. Details on page 31. Below the nameplate, FCTA, that's Federal Capital Territory Administration, arrests 29 Lagos-bound Okada riders. Kieran already read that. Oil price hits $35 per barrel. That's page 27. This story is on COVID-19 with the kicker chloroquine trial to continue in Nigeria. And medical experts divided on NAFDAC's action. Now, there is a quote there coming from NAFDAC. It says, there is data to prove that hydroxychloroquine worked for many COVID-19 patients who would continue our own clinical trials in Nigeria. That's according to NAFDAC. And then you see there on the right side, that's the usual sidebar for the Nation newspaper, showing in grim figures total number of COVID-19 cases around the world, over 5.6 million and over 350,000 dead. 2.4 million have recovered. And country by country, the U.S. continues to take the lead with well over 100,000 dead now. And you see the Nigerian numbers, also the active cases in Nigeria, according to the calculation here, 5,708. New cases, 276. Fatalities, 249. Now, also inside, it says Edo government tests 1,578, traces 1,009. Dogs to detect coronavirus. Oni, my role in herbal treatment. Wiki replaces lockdown with curfew. Lockdown cost more deaths. That's some controversy raging there from a Stanford professor. He's also a Nobel laureate. Bayelsa sends 25 samples to UPTH. UPTH is University of Port Harcourt Teaching Hospital. No death in Benue, says Commissioner. NCDC activates casino lab. Now, the other headlines there on the front page, that's the second lead story. NDDC accuses lawmakers of seeking 6.4 billion naira fake payment. Reps, this is sheer blackmail. and agencies spent billions despite COVID-19. And right at the foot of the front page there, Senate and reps return to consider revised 2020 budget. Ipman hails NNPC. 29.
Well, let's start with COVID-19. Lagos yesterday registered 161 new COVID-19 cases. Rivers 36, Edo 27, Kaduna 19, and Nasarawa 10. This is the 5 of the 15 states. 10 other states recorded single units, bringing the total number registered yesterday to about 276. So far, the national total is about 8,344. There were 23 deaths yesterday, and the death total in 34 states of the Federation is 249. Anambra recorded his first death yesterday. It's a 68-year-old man who unfortunately reported late to hospital. They in fact took his test, unfortunately, before the result came, and which was positive. He had already died. Kaduna, like you reported there, has ordered a 60-day lockdown. After 60 days lockdown, it had ordered another 2 weeks of lockdown. The Deputy Governor, Hajia Hadiza Balarabe, announced this in a broadcast yesterday. However, in the new dispensation, there will be a 3-day window. This is to allow citizens to restock their foodstuff. Other adjustments include lockdown in 3 days. Private sector firms will be allowed to operate on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Restaurants will be allowed also to operate on those days, but they will provide only takeaway services. Vulcanizers, welders, mechanics, and others who provide similar services are also to open on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. However, in spite of this partial relaxation, the state government is emphasizing that health protocols must strictly be adhered to. Face masks outside, physical distancing, washing of hands, and also avoiding large gathering. The government has indicated any violation of this protocol will mean, or any spike in the number of COVID-19 across the state will mean a reimposition of the restriction. Meanwhile, schools, places of worship, that is churches and mosques, as well as markets, are to remain closed. Government is to engage the various leaders, religious, traditional, transport, market unions, schools, to discuss conditions for reopening subsequently. Kaduna has so far 1,900 tests, and they have registered 208 cases. You recall the governor was one of the, the index case in that state. 128 has been discharged. There are now 80 active cases in Kaduna, 6 deaths. Across the Kaduna state into Katsina, Katsina state that opened up for just a week before, just a few days before Salah, for 1 week, has now clamped down a lockdown on 3 local governments. That is Katsina, Daura, and I think Bathagarawa. The governor says these 3 local governments are responsible for 50% of the infections in the state. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says that figures of confirmed cases and death in Africa do not appear to be real. The World Health Body is worried that the Africa's case doesn't appear as if there's enough tests being taken seriously. Currently, Africa has about 115,000 cases. The record shows that there are 69,000 active cases, and those that have been discharged are about 46,000. Deaths are 3,400. South Africa is highest on the continent, 23,650, followed by Algeria, 8,506. Nigeria has caught up almost with Algeria now. We now have 8,068 cases. 3 countries on the continent have no deaths at all. These are Namibia, they've had 21 cases, no death. Seychelles, 11 cases, no death. Lesotho, 2 cases and 1 dead. The world over, cases are now 5.4 million, and the death is 344,000. And that's why the World Health Organization is concerned. The death toll all over the world is 344,000. On the continent of Africa is only 3,400. And say something is not right. There are also those who say that the impact of COVID-19 has manifested by way of like malaria and flu. And because malaria has always been on the African continent, there are perhaps some kind of acquired resistance for this COVID-19.
Yes,
and that is why accounting for the low figures. But, well, scientifically, World Health Organization is expressing concern. Then there is a report that was said about the presidential order, which was signed about a week ago. Governors of the 36 states are holding their 9th teleconferences today, and they are to look at that presidential order. The order, in essence, was to give force to Section 5, amendment of Section 5 and 121 of the 1999 Constitution, put forward by the 8th National Assembly. Some lawyers have argued that the executive order was unnecessary following the constitutional amendment, which is now a law. But the Attorney General of the Federation says that yes, the executive order is necessary. It is to ensure effective implementation of that order. The order actually reads that any amount standing to the credit of the House of Assembly of a state or the judiciary in the Consolidated Revenue Fund to a state shall be paid directly to the said bodies without any reservation. Unfortunately, the states have observed that only in default.
I'm just wondering why should anybody be against the financial autonomy for a House of Assembly? Because well, if the Constitution has been amended, even if not, the state government should not be controlling the funds meant for judiciary and, of course, the House of Assembly, just as they are controlling that of local government areas. And, when you talk about financial probity and, good governance, you need to allow other arms of government to also experience autonomy to some level, so that there will be checks and balances. It's not just if you're a governor, you now be in charge of every financial dealings in the state, whereas the Constitution has made provision for other arms of government to also, have autonomy. I don't understand the argument on the part of the governors.
Well, the governors have not made any fresh argument. I think that their proposed meeting will disclose whatever new arguments that they have against financial autonomy for the state judiciary and also for local governments. Kira, perhaps you ask a rhetorical question that you don't understand why the executive at the subnational level would seek to control the funds going to the legislature or to the local government in particular. These are the control mechanisms. And that's why you'll be hearing of the imperial majesties as governors. So we've had lawmakers here talk about the humiliation that they undergo when they go to the office of the governor to seek approval for the smallest of expenditures. Now, it's the same thing you have for local governments. Local governments have virtually no control over what they are doing because they are directly under the supervision as well as oppression.
You can't undertake any project as a local government without the knowledge of the governor. Yes. Even if it's a culvert you're trying to put in place, he has to know about it and how much that is going there. That's not good governance. For some of us who, read political science, you understand that, look, it's about who gets what, when and how. And in doing that, you have to respect what the law says. Like being an executive governor, they'll not give you all the powers in this world. And that is why some states are not breaking even in terms of even, internal financial revenue. Everybody depending on what government will bring at
when you look at the clear provisions of the Constitution, now the framers had the clarity of purpose in terms of making the local governments work for the betterment of all. They are also supposed to be revenue centers. They are also supposed to be development centers, but they have been emasculated. And then part of what you also see, you remember we've had, I don't know, Kira, whether you and I were on set, when we were evaluating 20 years of democracy, and that was last year. And we said, look, let's look at the tiers of government, how they have operated. Do we really have 3 tiers of government? Say, at the subnational level. At the federal level, you have it. You have the executive branch is there, represented by the presidency, the National Assembly is there, and then the judiciary, and you can see the way each of them tries to drive on his lane, without interference. But at the state level, well, in most cases, you just have one branch.
It's just zero.
And that is the financial control.
And if you speak against the governor, forget it, you will be impeached. That is what we've been seeing. That is why in some cases you see 5 persons, becoming majority of more than 24 persons in the House of and in the House of Assembly, and the chief judges who will say yes. We have seen that on several locations in this country.
Well, operationally, I think they are now remedying that. If you recall, there was the first initiative was to ensure that funds meant for local government should get to the local government first before anybody tampers with them. And initially, some outcries were raised. This is part of the initiative to ensure that all tiers of government, or all that are supposed to have autonomy regarding their financial autonomy, get it. Gradually, we are growing our democracy, and those aspects of it that has been determined to be not proper are now being righted.
We say we're growing our democracy we have been there now for how many years? So, I mean, it's high time.
Is there any democracy that's not growing? Yeah. Those who have had their democracy for 2 centuries are still growing.
What they do is that if a new issue comes up, they will tackle it based on the laws that have been made. In our case, it's a matter of winner takes it all. That's just the problem. And that's African politics. All right, so let's go to editorials this morning.
It is not, Kiri, I'm sorry to interject. It's not in all African countries that you have that. That's the electoral system. You don't have it in Namibia. You don't have it in South Africa. So where you have proportional representation, that tendency isn't there.
What removed the last South African president was corruption, and that is part of financial control we are talking about.
You were referring to the winner-take-all syndrome.
Yes, it is what we studied about African policy. That's why we are not growing as a continent, and that's why we rely much more on Europeans for almost every other thing that we do, and that's what is playing out now, even at this COVID-19 issue.
Kirian is giving us the benefit of his political side.
Please, let's go to
he has never won an election.
I was a politician. Averting post-COVID-19 food crisis in Nigeria. Earlier this year, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations reported that about 7 million Nigerians will experience food shortage between June and August 2020. And then, of course, there are the recent reports of bandits chasing away farmers from their farms in some parts of the country, even as the farming season is kicking off, is sending signals of a looming food crisis in the coming months in the country.
Yes, indeed, Kirian. Well, the editorial is saying that why government is making plans to ensure that a food import, which is about $6 billion a year, $6 billion is reduced by ensuring that we grow our agriculture and we are able to feed ourselves. The challenges of insurgency, banditry, and farmer herders clashes, coupled with the recent COVID-19, is making that a Herculean task. It has, however, apprised the initiative by the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development by ensuring that farmers are allowed to go to farm, and also agricultural inputs are also provided for. It has also praised the initiative that the President particularly gave directives that bandits should be flushed out of Katsina State. And the editorial is saying it's not only in Katsina, but wherever bandits are becoming an obstacle to agricultural cultivation, the instruction is that they should be flushed out. And it has cited the initiative that government has a very bold policy in the National Livestock Transformation Plan, which is supposed to cover 2019 to 2028. But with the advent of COVID-19, everything seems to have been put on hold. And therefore, government should not forget that COVID-19 is there and we may have to live with it. And therefore, they must go back to those plans to ensure that as a nation, we can feed ourselves and be self-sufficient. If not, we will be in dire straits as far as regards food supply and food sustaining our population.
Okay, Bayo, well, thank you for being around. We'll see you again tomorrow. All right, it's Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you on the network service of the NTA. We're taking a short break now. When we return, we'll get ahead with our item for discussion.
Coronavirus, also known as COVID-19, is spreading at an alarming rate all over the globe, including Nigeria. With the number of infected persons in Nigeria increasing daily, prevention is better than cure. Coronavirus has no cure. The virus spreads from one person, who affects two persons, and by the time the affected person is isolated, the two persons have affected four, and it keeps spreading. You must take preventive measures to save yourself and that of the people around you. Always wash your hands with soap and water. Put distance between yourself and others. Whenever you cough or sneeze, cover your mouth. Clean and disinfect surfaces. Stay at home if you're sick and contact the proper authorities. Together, we can cut down the spread of the coronavirus. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest TV network.
Today on Happy Clean Niger Mission, we visit Mrs. Johnson live in Lagos. Helen Paul. Hello, madam. Would you like to join us on this mission?
Yes, but how?
Just one question for you. How do you keep your toilet clean?
I use regular detergent and bleach for washing and removing yellow stains. I have been using it for years.
Oh, madam. The regular detergents and bleach are used for washing clothes. To clean your toilet properly, you need Harpic 10X. It is specially made for stains in the toilet. Harpic Thick formula settles on stains and gives 10 times better cleaning compared to regular detergents and bleach.
Wow! Now I'm convinced, Helen Paul.
Really?
Yeah.
Now that she's part of the mission, the next house is yours.
Now believe this Koroti. You know, if you touch black man, if you like, gather the whole Niger, come together, make the cough. Nothing.
Which one you want?
Give me V&D.
I beg, get small pieces.
How much you want to give him?
Give me 200.
Take your change now. You don't want your change.
My people, this coronavirus, na serious matter. May una wash una hands regularly. Come use alcohol-based hand sanitizer. If you no see water, wash your hand. Make una sit down for house. You see this virus, so e no get leg. Now we dey waka kurukere. No waka around make the virus for die. No forget, say, the betterment of our people. Now for your handy day.
This message is from the Akinfade Foundation in partnership with the National Orientation Agency with support from MacArthur Foundation.
Coronavirus is real. Steps to avoid this pandemic. Wash your hands regularly or sanitize your hands. Keep social and physical distancing. Avoid crowded places. Stay at home unless absolutely necessary. Don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth if your hands are not clean. Avoid the spread of coronavirus. Coronavirus is real.
There is a lot of fake news and report circulating, especially on social media, on the coronavirus. Do not believe or partake in the spread of these fake reports. If it is not on the official website or news from the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, NCDC, disregard such report. Only together can we beat this virus. Only together can we overcome this pandemic. Follow the instructions and guidelines provided to combat this virus. Most importantly, stay at home. Self-isolate, regardless of your status. The virus doesn't move unless we move. Let us work together to better Nigeria. Together, we can do this. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
We thank you for staying with us. Now, before we get into our discussion on COVID-19, conduct of Edo and Ondo elections, here is a background report by Abdulsalam Jabril.
The forthcoming governorship polls in Edo and Ondo states, like many other events in the country,
is expected to be challenged by the presence of the coronavirus in the country. It will be recalled that in February this year, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, fixed dates for the governorship election in Edo State for September 19th, while that of Ondo State was fixed for October 10th. The following month, the Electoral Commission postponed the governorship by-elections in Plateau, Bayelsa, and Imo states indefinitely to contain the spread of COVID-19 across the country. With the increasing number of COVID-19 cases across the country, concerns have been raised about whether or not it is safe for the Commission to conduct elections, especially in light of social and physical distancing measures to curtail further spread of the virus. In response to this, INEC, in a policy document titled Policy on Conducting Elections in the Context of COVID-19 Pandemic, lists some safety measures the Commission has developed and ready to adopt in the conduct of the Edo and Ondo elections, as well as for future elections in emergency situations. The policy document adopts all the guidelines issued by the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 and the National Center for Disease Control, NCDC, for the control of coronavirus. The 10-point policy document, among other measures, mandates the compulsory use of face masks at polling units and all election locations, maintaining that voters without face masks would be turned back from the polling unit. Now, with Nigeria's peculiar electioneering system, which often involves large gatherings during campaigns and voting, how effective will INEC measures be towards protecting voters and officials and curtailing the spread of COVID-19? Guest on Good Morning Nigeria will be providing answers shortly.
Many thanks, Jabril, for that backgrounder. We have here with us in the studios to discuss this issue Mr. Festus Okoye, who's a lawyer and also National Commissioner, as well as Chairman, Information and Voter Education Committee of the Independent National Electoral Commission. Mr. Okoye, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Also here with us in the studios, would like to welcome usually a regular face in election matters. Has been in hiding all the while that the coronavirus has been raging. We thank him for being here with us. Ezenwa Nwago is election observer and also chairman, Partners for Electoral Reform and convener Say No Campaign Nigeria. So Ezenwa Nwago, pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yes, and joining us from our studio in Benin is Osawaru Okunzwa, a public affairs analyst. It's a welcome to the program.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
On Skype from Akure is Professor Bayo Aborishade, a social and public affairs commentator and union activist. He's also a professor of English and communication at the Federal University of Technology, Akure. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our program this morning.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be with you.
Okay, my gentlemen, our delight to have you once again for today's conversation. Let's begin with Mr. Festus Okoye. At the time INEC issued its guidelines for the Edo and Ondo governorship elections in February, Nigeria was still innocent of COVID-19. But here we are 3 months later, in fact, exactly 3 months today, it's a new normal that we are battling with. There's been a paradigm shift. How significantly has this impacted your plans and preparation for the elections in Edo and Ondo State?
Well, you know, the new situation is a novel situation. And because it's a novel situation, some of the plans we had in place had to change completely. We never anticipated a situation where we would be more or less struggling on whether to postpone or not to postpone what we call the end of tenure elections. And unfortunately, because of the constitutional parameters under which these elections ought to be conducted, it is very, very clear to us that we have to find ways and means of continuing with the business of conducting elections. So what we have done is to re-engineer our processes, recalibrate our processes to take into consideration the novel situation we are faced with. So what we have adopted is what I call a policy of inclusion and consultation to get through with this type of situation. So the corona pandemic has affected significantly some of our processes and some of our procedures because, for instance, prior to this particular period, during elections, we normally hire buses to take ad hoc staff to the polling units, and each bus contains a total of 14 passengers. But because of the because of this pandemic, we have to be hiring 2 instead of 1, so that we can carry just 7 passengers. And then with the issue of face masks, the issue of hand sanitizers, and also the issue of physical and social distancing has come into being. So what we have done is to develop a business continuity plan to make sure that the business of election continues even in these difficult circumstances. But the circumstances are slightly difficult, but we are committed to surmounting some of these difficulties and conduct elections so that Nigeria does not slip into a constitutional crisis under our watch.
All right, I'm still staying with you.
Yes.
Because it is important that we look at some specifics
yes.
with respect to the policies that we've put in place. Well, it's a novel situation and very peculiar
yes.
because as it is now, presently, coronavirus pandemic is not going very soon.
Yes.
So invariably, we are going to conduct election while we have to tackle the pandemic as well. So you have 2 issues to contend with here. To be able to organize a free and fair election, and of course to also ensure that the electorate will adhere to the health protocol that is in place. So what are those specifics, so that we begin to know what should be the behavior of the electorate, the behavior of ad hoc staff, and your INEC staff, and what have you, because of course, we have to deal with the logistics, in terms of election, conduct of election.
Well, the law has given us the power to issue regulations, issue guidelines, and also issue manuals that will regulate the conduct of elections. And these are powers derivable and derived from the Electoral Act and also the Constitution. So what we have done is that, 1, we have mapped out a policy that puts the health and welfare of the people as the center of the electoral process. So whatever we do in this pandemic period, we are going to take into consideration the fact that the people need to be healthy and the people need to be safe as they go out to go and vote in the elections. So for our own processes and procedures, we are insisting that, 1, we are going to do most of our business during this period electronically. So those who are going to serve as ad hoc staff of the commission are going to apply to serve as ad hoc staff electronically. Secondly, in terms of their training, we are going to combine both face-to-face training and virtual training for some of these ad hoc staff. And we're also going to provide them with protective equipment. That is for our ad hoc staff. And then for the transporters that we're going to hire to transport some of our ad hoc staff, we are going to insist on building the issue of the provision of hand sanitizers and some other health gadgets into the contract that we are going to sign with them. And then for the voters, we are insisting, and we are going to make sure that the security agencies and the health authorities enforce it, that if you do not have face mask, you should not even come near the polling unit. And we are developing a health protocol that allows us to know what to do with a voter who comes to the polling unit and shows symptoms of COVID-19. So we are working out some of these things, and that is why, since we don't have all the answers, and we now have a policy, we have broadened the scope of engagement. We are going to start engagement with our resident electoral commissioners, And then thereafter, we are going to engage the political parties, civil society groups and organizations and the media. We are going to present this document, this policy document to them, and also get a feedback from them. And then from the feedback we get, we will also be in a position to clean up some of the administrative processes and procedures. But as I say, this is a working document, and we are going to go into this election not having a precedent behind us. As a way of making sure that we have control of the situation, we may likely organize 1 or 2 by-elections with some of the smaller constituencies and do a test run, a pilot, before we go into the governorship elections. So that's exactly what we are putting in place.
All right, Mr. Okoye, thank you very much. I mean, we will still have the benefit of your presence with us in this conversation. But happily, you have indicated that this is a working document, yes. Even though it's crafted already as a policy emanating from INEC, and the fundamental assumption is that all things being equal, that we don't see a catastrophic spike in the number of coronavirus cases, and you don't have a lockdown during the elections, Kirian.
Exactly.
Imagine, because if you have a lockdown, you can't have your logistics. You can't have people come out and so on and so forth. So we all hope that we'll flatten the curve, as the saying goes, but our numbers are still rising. We'll flatten the curve and then see a drop subsequently. Let's bring in Ezenwa Wangu now. Ezenwa, well, for you as an election observer, as indeed one of very active civil society groups usually concerned about elections in this country, what does COVID-19 present ahead of 2 governorship elections and indeed some outstanding by-elections?
Well, I think I just will have to take it from where you left it. Elections shouldn't be a call to martyrdom. So what that means is that every person in the election stakeholder pyramid has responsibility at this time to understand that we all must first take responsibility. And so what that means is that health will be very, very paramount, will take very, very topmost in everything that has to go with the elections that we're looking to in September and October this year. But having said that, there is going to be much more interest in having conversation with the political parties and the politicians and the candidates. Often we pay a lot of attention to the election management body, and for obvious reasons. But the truth is that the protocols, you can't run it from these protocols. You are going to provide hand sanitizers, you are going to provide face masks, you are going to do voluntary testing of your staff who will be, if they want to be sure that they are fine and all of that. But we have challenges with law and order. We already have a law and order regime that is problematic. Look at the lockdown, enforcement of the lockdown. The challenges that you face are enormous. You know, everyone knows it. The security agencies must also come into the conversation to understand that if they subvert this process, then we all get into very serious risk. Meaning that if we say we don't want people who don't have face masks to approach the polling units, then law and order regime has to be enforced to ensure that that doesn't happen. Secondly, the politicians who also mobilize, because we are also going to be watching their primaries. We are going to be watching their campaigns. We are going to watch how much themselves they have inculcated the issues around COVID-19 protocols that all of us. So it is from there that we're going to measure how much they are going to be responsible going forward. So I think that I'm excited that INEC has kickstarted, a multi-stakeholder conversation around elections and pandemic. But much more than that, the media, civil society, we need to take deeper interest in having sectorial conversations that helps us to drive in the need to understand that this is a novel situation. We have not seen anything like it before. And like you said, if the curves if we flatten the curves, we'll be excited, we'll be able to, but if we get into a situation where there has to be a forced lockdown again, and it depends on citizens now. Both citizens in Edo and Ondo have responsibility to organize from now on in such a way that makes sure that curve that we're talking about flattens, because it's not going to flatten by wishes. It has to be concerted, deliberate, intentional action of all the stakeholders to make sure that happens.
All right. Let's go to Benin, where we have Osawaru Okunzoa, a public affairs analyst. Osawaru, you have listened to Festus Okoye, the INEC Chairman, Information and Education, when he railed out some of the components of the policy that INEC has put in place to conduct the Ondo and the Edo elections this year. Now, what is your take on this preparation that he has spoken about? And having been monitoring elections in Nigeria, will this situation bring about what may be called a window of opportunity for even politicians to rig elections? Because in Nigeria here, we have learned that every situation is an opportunity, and some persons would like to seize such opportunity to see how they can rig elections. Because after all said and done, remember that people are vying for positions of authority, and there is anxiety, and there's also some plans, as we always have it, that some would like to rig the election and what have you. So now, looking at the pandemic, and of course the conduct of the election and the behavioral pattern of Nigerians during elections, what is your thought?
The plan outlined by Mr. Festus Okoye on behalf of INEC is very impressive, going by the elements even projected on the screen. And as everybody has agreed, we're in a new situation. It's going to be an opportunity for us to learn, but INEC does have a lot to borrow, even from the Congo, because they did hold a presidential election, at least in some provinces, during the Ebola crisis. So, in that regard, it's not an absolutely new situation. Our own INEC can borrow from the federal body of the Congo. And then, since INEC has committed itself to conducting the election instead of postponing it, again, what they are trying to do, a new situation, is impressive, and I think it's going to work. The next step is going to persuade all the stakeholders to observe these provisions, so that, just like he had said, Edo and Ondo will not suffer a constitutional crisis. Now, these elements that border on the health hazard or health threats of our new situation, since we are not going to freeze and go home, is an opportunity for us to even set up a kind of laboratory where are we going to learn from this very instance. Now, as he has said, in place of hiring a boss, they are now hiring two to observe the issue of spacing. It should apply across board. For the polling units, how many people were you supposed to have? Is it possible to expand it? Is it possible to extend the time for voting? If it was going to be from 6 a.m. to, say, 2 p.m., could it not be 6 a.m. to about 5 p.m., 4 p.m., to enable people come in slow streams instead of converging at the same time? I think it's the commitment here that is important, that you want to conduct an election according to the timetable prescribed or within the frame of time prescribed by the Constitution. That is commendable still. That cannot be repeated too often. So all these measures, they now have to work out, seek the advice of experts to see how these things will work out in reality. And then for the rest of us, apart from the INEC, the media, the voters, and the rest, I think we have to take a cue. The general life has been dictated, the pace of general life has been dictated by COVID already. So when it comes to voting, we simply just adjust ourselves, obey instructions to make sure we are all safe and so on. As for usual political behavior, I don't really think if, as our other friend in the studio has said, Mr. Ezenwa, our security agencies take their briefing from INEC to recognize the peculiarity of our situation, I don't really think people can exploit it so much. At any rate, if we were going to exploit it, it would be across board. It doesn't confer an advantage on any particular person or any political party. So it's a general condition we are all subject to. So it's commendable that INEC is going ahead to conduct the election, and the measures they have advanced for the safety of every person involved in the conduct of the election, I also believe the measures are appreciable.
Okay, Osawaro Okunzuwa, speaking to us from our Benin Network Center. Of course, Osawaro is a physician with specialization in psychiatry, as well as being a public affairs analyst. Thank you very much. We'll return to you later on in the course of the conversation. Let's go over now to Akure, where we have Professor Bayo Borishade joining us via Skype. Professor Borishade, tell us, what is the mood like in Ondo with regard to the determination of INEC to proceed with the governorship election in that state, which is coming up sometime in October?
I believe INEC is correct in going ahead with the elections. I believe even if you postpone the elections, we do not know when COVID will be out of the way. So what I think we need to do is go ahead, but plan and plan well. I've never envied INEC. They have a huge responsibility, made much bigger now by COVID-19. What do I mean? Nigeria has always had infrastructural deficits in every area of our national life. Huge deficits. And I'll show how that comes into play now. Transportation, health, politicians. All of these are very huge. And our people, ourselves, our behavior, our socio-economic conditions, all of this come into play right now. I would have suggested for the following months that INEC has, they should go into scenario simulations. They need to simulate several scenarios and learn how to prepare for each one. For instance, they are talking about training their ad hoc staff virtually. That in itself poses a huge challenge. How many of the ad hoc have access, compose of electricity to last the period, even if you are going to pay them for data? Where are the facilities they are going to use? That's minor. If you consider a scenario where you know our politicians are going to take advantage of this situation, and our people, particularly the wretched of the earth, who constitute the largest percentage of voters in Nigeria, are also going to take advantage of this situation. How are they going to behave in a situation of COVID? Politicians are going to buy votes. The people are going to sell their votes. People would come to the polling stations already knowing that they are going to be bribed, and they are prepared to take the bribe. Now, COVID-19 is here. Is INEC going to be able to provide health officials in each polling station for somebody who comes in, who begins to cough and sneeze, who is wearing a mask? But you know that people will scatter. The security situation is dire, and you need to be able to convey such individuals away from the polling unit. Things will be disorganized. But all I'm saying is INEC need to simulate all manner of scenarios and prepare for each of these. Take the Electoral Act. Has INEC simulated a situation where you know politicians buying votes, employing violence, and all of these are going to disrupt the elections. And how we are going to tackle this. Do we need supplementary provisions to the Electoral Act to enable INEC cope with the situation? These are some of the things. In Ondo State, for example, we have the riverine area where that area has always posed huge problems to INEC. My people within the university here have been employed by INEC. There have been reports of people being tipped into the ocean on the high seas, even after the voting has taken place and they are conveying materials back to the mainland. So what is INEC going to do in a situation of COVID? These are all things. So I'm going to suggest to INEC, please simulate scenarios and prepare. If we need extra provisions of the Electoral Act to cope with this situation, please do so. Transportation is going to be a huge problem. Even when there was no COVID, INEC officials have been known to come very late to polling stations. Therefore, polling will not start by 8, and there you cannot expect it to close by 2 p.m. So how are we going to deal with this? These are all the situations that I believe INEC will need to take into consideration.
All right. Professor Borishede has indeed raised a number of issues, and I want to bring in Professor Okoye once more to speak to some of these issues you raised. I may just refresh your memory on that. Talking about health officials at polling units, and then the Electoral Act, whether it's need to seek for new provisions to enable you implement whatever plan that you have. Now, the re-engineering aspect that you mentioned earlier on, which means you are going to re-engineer your usual operational structure because of COVID-19. That's the operational structure which you normally use during elections. Now, put all that together and let us know if INEC is prepared for eventualities or happenstances during this election, because of course whatever you may have put in place in terms of plan or structure, the implementation is key to the success of the conduct of the elections in those two states.
Now, the Commission has what we call an Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security. What we have done is that we are pulling in officials of the National Center for Disease Control into this particular agency, and then we're also bringing in an official from the National Orientation Agency into the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security, at least to advise on health-related issues. And we have also given matching orders to the Resident Electoral Commissioner for Edo and the Resident Electoral Commissioner for Ondo to liaise very closely with the health officials in terms of the local dynamics in both states and what to do relating to health situations, especially when they occur at the polling units. But I want to say that it will be next to impossibility to provide a health official in every polling unit in Edo State and in every polling unit in Ondo State. But what we want to do is to work out very clear protocols on what to do when somebody comes to the polling unit and shows symptoms of being sick in relation to COVID-19. So we are working out those protocols. I completely agree with the professor that we need to do a lot of scenario building, and we are already doing that. But, let me emphasize that the conduct of election is a multi-stakeholder venture. There are specific functions which the Electoral Act and which the Constitution has given to other organs of government. The security agencies have the responsibility of maintaining law and order, and we are working closely with them to make sure that nobody comes to the polling unit to come and disrupt elections. Now, I agree that there will be challenges at the polling unit. Now, we are going to cope with the challenges of people disregarding all these protocols and being rowdy at the polling units. So we are taking that on board. But that is exactly why we have scheduled some of these consultations, especially with the political parties, to tell the political parties that it is our responsibility to make sure that there's orderliness at the polling units. And as I have pointed out, we are recalibrating the polling units and restructuring the polling units. We are going to have an inner cordon of the polling units and a slightly outer cordon, where people will be moved into the inner cordon when they are ready to vote, and then those who are not voting will remain at the outer cordon. But we are not likely going to create additional voting points because, for instance, if you have 10 polling units in a primary school and you have 10 voting points, that's a large crowd. So what we want to do is to even contract the voting points to make sure that we have complete hold and complete control of the polling units, especially in Edo State and non-Edo State. So we are looking at some of these scenarios, and it's our hope and prayer that the voters will behave themselves at the polling units, recognizing the fact that their health will be an issue, and that the commission is also making very serious arrangements to make sure that in trying to conduct elections that we don't endanger the health of the ordinary voters, and also that the voters do not also endanger the health of the electoral officials who are going to conduct these elections. In specific response to the issue he raised in relation to the ad hoc staff, we are going to do both face-to-face training of the ad hoc staff and also electronic training of this ad hoc staff. Prior to this particular period, we already have a database of some of the core members who served the commission before, and we also have a database of some of the students in the federal tertiary institutions who have served as ad hoc staff, and we're already in touch with the NYSC and also the other school authorities in terms of harvesting some of the ad hoc staff that are going to participate in this election. But we don't have all the answers. We are going to rely on the political parties to make their own suggestions. We are engaging the civil society in a very, very robust way. We're also engaging the media, and we are going to harvest all these things and use them creatively and innovatively to conduct elections. But by and by, whatever advice we receive, whatever suggestions we receive, and whatever recommendations comes in, INEC will remain as the main driver of the electoral process. We are not going to share that responsibility with any other agency, any other organ of government.
Well, Mr. Okoye, there's the other issue that Professor Aborishade raised, yes. Which is to say, look, have you examined the sufficiency of the provisions in the Electoral Act? Right. Whether or not you have sufficient elbow room under the COVID-19 pandemic, yes, to bring in your new measures as well as your scenario sketching? Yes. Or would you require an amendment of the Electoral Act, or otherwise, to enable you to function much more effectively?
No, we don't require to amend any law. Section 160 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended, gives us the power to even impose duties on other officials. Section 153 of the Electoral Act also gives us the power to make regulations, to make guidelines, and also to make manuals to supplement the provisions of the Electoral Act. And the regulations and the guidelines and the manuals we make are part of the law. Right. So what we are doing is that some of the provisions in this policy, we are going to extract them and then input them into our own regulations and amend the regulations, amend their guidelines, and also amend these manuals. And those manuals and those regulations become law, and they are part of the Electoral Act. So we are going to use them to bring into being some of these new measures and some of these regulations that we are putting in place.
The question that Kingsley re-emphasized, has a lot to do with the post-election, crisis, if you like. Nigerians said they're in love with going to courts and, even stopping you from announcing a result and what have you. So if there is need for any amendment, now is the time. So that not after election, some people will say, I'll stop the INEC from announcing election in the Edo State, for instance. It is not new, in this country. All right, given your experience as an election observer, what are your concerns? You've listened to Professor Okoye. You also heard Professor Aborishade and some of the concerns that he raised, things that might raise, ugly situations. Of course, we know that rigging is part of an electoral process. Whether you would like it or not, it's been on record over the years, and that has refused to abate. Now, what are those concerns that you have that may be a cog, in the wheel of progress with respect to elections in those two states?
Well, the big concern for me would be simply whether it's COVID-19 or not even COVID-19. The challenge for election is law and order, because there are no new the additions that will come to play are just health related. If you look at it, do you want to organize voters in an orderly manner, whether there is COVID-19 or not? That should be the normal. The normal should be that people should queue and not create. So who has responsibility to make sure that that doesn't happen? So the pressure won't necessarily be whether you are providing hand sanitizers, face masks, ambulance close to, those are not those are things that you could provide. But the real challenge in Edo and Ondo will be the attitude of the stakeholders. Understanding that election is both a sociological and a competitive enterprise. Okay, somebody wants to take the trophy, and in wanting to take the trophy, he wants to tackle roughly. He wants to, using your word, elbow and take advantage, undue advantage. But there should be a regulator, and that regulator is the the security agencies. If the security agencies and the political parties and their candidates understand that the most important variable in this election will be how do we ensure that there is law and order and that people respect these protocols. Because once you don't respect these protocols, you endanger everybody. That's the big issue. It's not because let's not now make a fetish of the COVID-19 as if it presents what it presents is a health concern. So what do you do to ameliorate the health concern? But the other issues that dominate our electoral process, they are not new. That people will be buying votes is not new. Now, if you buy votes, the money is contaminated. It's possible that you are going to get money that has COVID.
Suppose they drink methylated spirit.
No, that's what I'm saying. So it's additional costs on those who will get the methylated spirit. You understand? So what we are dealing with for me really is health-related issue. Mm-hmm. So if there is disorderliness, if people decide to, snuff cut ballot boxes, if they decide to pour ink on results and all of those things have nothing to do with coronavirus. They are already issues that are, intrinsically endemic in our electoral process. So the education, the voter education, the voter engagement and stakeholder engagement that has to happen has to put law and order within the COVID space as primary, as important, and that's what I.
All right, thank you very much, Wango. I was just cracking a joke about methylated spirit. We hope that potential readers will not see that as an advice. It wasn't intended to be an advice. Okay, now let's go back to Dr. Sawaro Kunzwa in our Benin Network studios. Dr. Kunzwa, of course, you remember that 4 years ago we had you as one of our guests discussing the conduct of the governorship election in Benin, and there was the issue of the chairmen, those who were sharing the thing on the queues. But here we are. Our focus has been mostly now on just matters before the election and then conduct of the election proper and perhaps the collation announcement of results. Let's look at the other lead-up activities to the election, the primaries. The parties are going to have their primaries. Some have said direct. That's the business of the political parties themselves. INEC is going to observe that. Then, once the candidates are known, there will also be the issue of campaigns. They have to be on the hustings. What exactly do you, not exactly, what can you foresee in terms of the new dynamics governing either the primaries or more particularly the campaigns ahead of the voting, say in Edo State, where voting will take place in September?
And then having to manage it also with family doesn't come cheap. But on the other
we're going to have reference to the regime imposed by COVID-19. It means, for instance, during your campaign, you're not going to be having a lot of crowds. You won't be gathering people in the same place to address them. It means you're going to do more of retailing, reaching individuals or very small groups for a start. It means, just like we have been saying here, on election day, social distancing will be observed so that a person who is symptomatic, for instance, will not come there to spread COVID to his compatriots. Definitely, in terms of collating as well, it means we are going to create space for the officers. It means we are going to provide hand sanitizers so that whatever they touch will not be a kind of format that is virus-bearing object to other persons. So I think we are going to rely on INEC as the major driver of the process to probably even advise the political parties, because I don't see how they are going to muster their own independent expertise. If INEC is already incorporating the NCDC into his advisory council, I think it should go the whole hog. Political parties should benefit from it. The voters should be told through the media, NOA, and so on and so forth to say, this is a special situation. Instead of standing just immediately behind the person in the queue, maybe 3 feet, maybe 4, maybe 5, maybe even the 6 feet recommended. So long as the election takes place and nobody goes home with COVID, I think all will be well. So the atmosphere, everybody is aware now that things are no longer the same. There's a new normal, as we have always agreed, and so we should conduct ourselves accordingly. And I also expect, too, the whole place will not be agog as before, because people should be very careful, mindful of their health, so that they don't go home ill after participating in election processes or voting proper.
Okay.
Yeah, Kira, I just wanted to say, sorry, that's an issue that Dr. Okunzuwa raised. He talked about retailing the campaigns, in other words, using small groups and all of that. Well, some other persons would say, all right, so deploy more of ICT. We have seen increased access, for instance, to new media and so on and so forth, which could be an option open to the candidates once campaigns begin. But how would one also deal with the issue of fake news, just as we have seen a preponderance of fake news in the era of COVID-19? People using all kinds of things, to, as it were, traffic in news which isn't true.
Well, just like Mr. Ezenwa has said right before you there, the only thing that we are adding now, or because of its gravity, is COVID. Our electoral culture remains the same. We have to improve it otherwise. Disinformation, misinformation, rightful information, all these have been components of our electoral behavior all along. Maybe the issue of COVID cannot be used as a tool of scaremongering to probably say one particular place is being sprayed with some kind of viruses and so on and so forth. But beyond that, I don't actually see any additional burden added by COVID.
What he's trying to refer is actually that, look, if an opponent knows that the other person has a base, where he's likely going to win election, you can now spread the news that there's coronavirus in that area. So
that's right. Instead of the physical violence, it becomes soft violence.
Exactly. So don't go there. That's coronavirus. Well, of course, as I pointed out earlier on, that Nigerians, some Nigerians, not all of us, some Nigerians, like to seize opportunities like this, to dish out some level of misdemeanor, especially in election situations. Let's bring in again Professor Bayo Abarisha. Prof, you raised very pertinent issues in your opening statement, and one of them is the issue of attitude of Nigerians during elections. And a short while ago, Ms. Okoye told us that election is a multi-stakeholder affair. Now, talking about Ondo State, where you are, election is going to hold there in October, if I'm right. Yeah, it's October. Give us an idea of the scenario in Ondo State. What are the feelings of people? Is there any kind of, not tension now, but a feeling of election as it used to be in Ondo State? And what are you expecting to have with respect to attitude of Ondo State people during elections, and what they will be doing with respect to COVID-19 pandemic when they'll be having election?
Yeah, in Ondo State, the atmosphere is already charged. People are aware that elections are going to take place, and people are prepared to participate in the elections. Ondo State people are politically aware. However, right now we are facing the COVID-19 situation. There is, by law, a lockdown. But do people obey the lockdown? Mr. Nwagu raised a critical point. Law and order is a problem in Nigeria. It's not only during elections, generally. Right now, state governors are battling with law and order enforcers. With the lockdown, people are moving into the states at will. How do they do it? And governors are not happy with this. And this is the way COVID-19 spreads in itself. Now we can imagine what would happen during electioneering processes, the campaigns, and all of that. So we do have a problem with that. And as I said, there is a section of the state that we know there would always be problems during elections. What is INEC in consultation with the Nigeria police doing and the law enforcement agencies about containing that particular area? But the situation is such that now, with COVID-19, it's going to be more complicated. But I would again speak to INEC on this. If you go by the timetable set, good timetable, but pay attention to the processes of the primaries that may lead into litigations that will eat into the time of display of register of voters and the election itself. And I'm going to advise, in terms of the register display, a multimodal approach to this should be employed. For those who are educated, please go online and check here. For the areas where we know are rural, let's have enablers who would help people in checking for their names on the register. That always poses a problem. People would always complain that the register was displayed only 2 days to the election and they couldn't find their names, and they lodged complaints and there were no responses. Let's pay attention to this area. These are some of the areas where people and politicians in particular stand to derail election. They know they will not be able to win. But if I can win, I can disrupt the process. I can negotiate with those who are in a position to win and who have a larger stake for a good chunk, if not in naira, in position. So let INEC pay attention to these areas. And as I said, pay particular attention to that section of the state that has always posed a big problem. So monitor the primaries, but please note that the primaries are going to be disrupted. The direct, indirect of some parties, those who are going to sell their parties to gain advantage in another, those who are going to move from one to the other to take advantage that they are already registered, and they are going to be the representatives of that party, there are going to be myriad of court cases. And I can pity INEC. They are going to be present everywhere. They are going to be represented. And when you put COVID-19 into the mix, there is a bigger problem. So these are my recommendations to INEC. For our people, I know that people are going to take advantage. The wretched of the earth, as I say, who have been deprived during this lockdown and the distribution of palliatives. People are disgruntled about the palliatives. And they are correct. Because I know lots and lots and lots of areas of Ondo State who are supposed to receive palliatives and who receive nothing. And they are going to take advantage during the election. This is the time they are going to get their palliatives. So what are we going to do about that? Law and order is nowhere when these things happen. So what is INEC going to do about it? These are real issues that have to be confronted in this coming election.
Professor Borishade, thank you very much. I mean, for the issues that you have raised. But Kirian is talking about people now at this time making their demand for the palliatives.
Exactly.
Well, that also makes it a lot easier, presumably, so that it's not labeled as bribery or electoral corruption. You know, we have this see and buy.
Exactly.
See and buy phenomenon. So if they bring branded palliatives to you now, it could be a branded, sorry, no, that would be against the Electoral Act. If you have a branded face mask on voting day, no, that would be against the prescription. But ahead of voting, during the campaigns, in a bag of salt, I think there were distributors of 5 kg or 2 kg Maggie cube, put the label of the candidate. So it's all palliatives.
Those ones will come during the elections. It's inevitable. I mean, it's been there over the years.
That's right. All right, so it's Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're taking a short break now. When we return, we have some tweets to take, and then we'll return to our guests.
Nigerians, coronavirus is dangerous. It can kill. When you see this sign, high fever, cough, shortness of breath, drowsiness, pneumonia, don't panic, don't hide, don't embark in self-medication. Promptly visit the nearest medical facility. Report all cases to the nearest hospital. Prevention is key. Avoid contact with infected persons. Avoid crowded areas as much as possible. Wash your hands regularly. Use hand sanitizers. Your life is precious. Stay alive. Live long, live right. This message is sponsored by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture and the Nigerian Film Corporation. Nigerian Film Corporation, powering possibility.
As a strong immune system increases the chances of victims surviving COVID-19, a corruption-free society creates opportunities for citizens to thrive and prosper. Build your immunity. Stop corruption now. Report all acts of corruption to ICPC on this toll-free number 0800 2255 4272. This message is brought to you by ICPC and NTA.
We have observed the lockdown. We have practiced the measures in order to curb the spread of the virus, but we can do better. The coronavirus spread is increasing daily, and only together can we cut down the numbers and defeat the spread of the virus. Remember, COVID-19 is not a death sentence, and a recovered patient cannot spread the disease. Do not stigmatize. Do not hesitate to report any case, or if you have come in contact with anybody that has been infected with COVID-19. If you have cough and fever, please stay at home and call your state hotline. Find state numbers at www.covid19.ncdc.gov.ng. Remember, it is for your own good and for the good of every Nigerian. Let us do better and defeat the virus. Together, we can do this. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
Well, you're welcome back. You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We have some tweets here, and we just go through them before we now wrap up our conversation this morning on Good Morning Nigeria. Let's begin with this one. Innocent Yawal James says the election during COVID-19 pandemic is going to be a lesson for the future if it's properly coordinated. We should be concerned about the security as well as because politicians are going to exploit the situation. It's up to INEC now.
Dele Jack Solomon, now that INEC has rolled out a framework for the conduct of the Edo and governorship elections plus outstanding by-elections, we implore political parties to develop their own guidelines and regulations for the conduct of the party primaries that will take into account the COVID-19 prevention protocols.
Mike Ayakwa, kudos to INEC for timely release of timetable for the governorship elections in Edo and Ondo states, despite COVID-19 debacle. We also applaud the precautions they put in place in this regard. It is now left for gladiators to obey the rules to the fullest. Anything less is unacceptable. The security agencies have great responsibilities in this regard, as well as INEC officials.
Festus Akimboyewa says even if INEC uses e-voting, that's not going to be used for the Edo and Ondo elections, by the way. It doesn't mean that the elections will be secure and credible when there are serious security issues surrounding online elections that may not be easy to sort out in our country. Whatever happens, large gatherings must be restricted during the elections.
Law Alpha C. The elections will witness poor turnout of voters in view of the prevailing global health emergency, as guidelines aimed at stopping the spread of COVID-19 will be draconian and engaging, and most people would shun the exercise.
Mutana Farouk, maintaining social distancing during an election is not far-fetched, but thumbprinting from the same ink pad is my concern here. What measures has INEC put in place to address such? Is there any arrangement for those who are in the isolation centers to also vote? Is there a presumption that people will be in isolation center from now till September, say in Edo, or up to October?
No, the point is that COVID-19 is not yet over.
That's right.
And globally, it's been made to be so, because if you look at the people who have been infected, then there are thousands, and if not hundreds of thousands. And for them to recover, it might take another 2 or 3 months, I guess. Maybe we don't pray for that anyway.
Absolutely.
But that's where the pendulum is going. Now, Utolo Sunday, the precautionary measures are in good shape. If electorates and INEC officials could adhere to them, we must not allow COVID-19 to dictate for us. Kudos to INEC on this one. Stay safe. COVID-19 is real.
Francis Obi, INEC has done well by releasing the timetable within the constitutional guidelines and praying that COVID-19 eases up and that the lockdown is also lifted. The parties should abide by the rules.
Ayuk, you say it's obvious there will be a low voter turnout in both states since COVID-19 has been recorded in Edo and Ondo, and the numbers keep rising. No measures put by INEC will keep the virus from spreading, since most voters simply won't adhere to such guidelines.
Adamo Estefanos, in my opinion, COVID-19 has come to stay. Now, we should just learn to live with it. Precautionary measures on COVID-19 set by INEC will be, as it were, a test run towards sustainable containment of COVID-19 during elections.
Obong Hemoy said, I heard INEC is going digital. That's a start to greatness. We've all been clamoring for e-voting, thanks to Corona. But I hope the e-vote won't be hacked.
Amogbala Humbabs, it will be very challenging for participating parties to run successful campaigns without the usual gathering of people. Now, if campaigns are to go by e-campaign, how many of the electorate have access to the internet? And by extension, how many of them use social media?
Chris Simeon, coronavirus does not matter much here because it's a pandemic. It won't last forever. What is paramount is free, fair, and credible elections and the ability of INEC to conduct clean elections.
Leo Fadaka, like Ebola in the Congo, COVID-19 has changed the method of conducting polls in Nigeria. INEC must digitize to meet global standards. the challenges must be confronted holistically. Well, those are the points.
In fact, Mr. Okoye should come in here. Are we, expecting to have e-voting in the near future? Has coronavirus brought in innovation, in your system? We know that it has done that globally anyway, because now we're talking about new normal, and that new normal concerns all sectors of human life, right? So are we going to be looking forward to any time in the future that we could really begin to migrate from where we are to where we ought to be with respect to deploying technology in our elections?
Well, even before this pandemic, the Commission had always deployed technology in the conduct of its affairs. Before this virus, or before this pandemic, we had piloted electronic collation and transmission of results. And even before this pandemic, we have even started putting in processes and procedures on electronic voting. So what we intend to do is, one, we have already worked out measures with the National Assembly towards altering the constitutional and legal framework for the conduct of elections, so that we can impute the use of technology specifically into the constitutional and electoral framework. Secondly, we have said it in our document that we are confident that the next major election in 2021 will be conducted electronically. And we are committed to that. We are working towards that. And we are very, very hopeful that with the measures we have in place, that Nigerians are going to migrate towards a new framework for the conduct of elections.
Well, Mr. Festus Okoye, as part of your scenario plotting suggested by Professor Borishade, would you also take into consideration that Ondo and Edo states are smack in the rainforest, and September and October are still part of the rainy season?
Yes, you know that the electoral calendar for Edo and Ondo was altered on account of election petitions, and on account of the victories by some of the political parties in the election. So we are taking into consideration all these things on board. We have directed the resident electoral commissioners and the administrative secretaries in the two states to conduct a security threat assessment of the election, and also conduct all other threats, or the assessment of all other threats that are likely going to impact on the elections, and report back to the Commission. And in the next few days, we are going to have a meeting of all the resident electoral commissioners. And since this is a one-state election, is a specific election, we have sufficient capacity to move into Edo State and then conduct a good election. And we have logistics and resources that we can pull in from the contiguous states into Edo State in order to ameliorate whatever challenges we have. But there will be challenges, definitely. But we are determined to surmount some of these challenges and conduct a good election.
Okay, Ezewanwago, given your experience, in the electoral field, Ondo and Edo states, electoral violence are not new to those two states. Considering also the COVID-19 environment that we are in now, sum up your vision for those two states with respect to this election.
Well, I was in the the election in Edo that the end of tenure is coming very close now, and proud to that I was also here. I was in this studio, and I've always told people that there's always an anticlimax for those two states. So when we were going to Edo, the idea was that, are you going to Edo? Do you have an insurance? What? That tenure is coming to a close. And with all the hype around it, you knew what then happened. It became a festival of absurdities in terms of people were not fighting, they were buying. They were seeing and buying. There was no need for. And then
there was also
akara of puff. So somebody called me and said, bros, you know they report, the only thing you report is it that we are fighting. Tell people that we are happy here too. So I know that scenario, but that's not taking away the fact that, you know, because that environment, the context this time around, there are a lot of variables that are playing in Edo right now that may not be playing in Ondo, but they are there. But having said that, I think that one way to mitigate that is to expand the net of consultation. INEC is consulting civil society, media, political parties, but the moral institutions have very great role to play at this point in time. And I mean the traditional rulers and the religious. We must find a way to get them into the conversation around peace for elections, around orderliness and all of that, because if they weigh in as well. So I am saying that the politician wants to create a scenario that helps him to get the trophy. You know, the trophy is the most important part of it, but he creates some kind of situation that gives the impression that, look, scares those who can be scared away. But at the end of the day, if the security agents, and Professor Bayo made that point, and I think we need to restate it, the subversion of the lockdown can be located in the people who want to break law. It is almost, whether here or outside this environment, people are programmed to want to break the law. But if the people who have responsibility to regulate behavior are professional, put their eye on the ball, we are going to go coast free. What has happened in summary, what has happened is that we have a situation in which people see election as Christmas, as bazaar. Both the security agents, the INEC officials, the voters, everybody think that this is the time, and like we were saying, palliative now. That's the consciousness with which we engage election.
We'll modify that and say some INEC officials.
Some INEC officials,
yeah,
yes.
Not all of that. Well, Dr. Sawaro Kunzwa in our Benin Network Center, I mean, the issue of law and order has been raised in our conversation today. But we also know that in the past, our elections have also been criticized on account of the over-militarization of security. We have seen it in Ekiti, we saw it in Osun, particularly these standalone elections, where tens of thousands of security personnel, police, army, civil defense, you name them, some of them wearing masks. At that time, masks were not even popular, and so on and so forth. Will this be a time to still have such a huge mobilization of security personnel, considering the close proximity in which they have to be camped or have to stay? But again, versus the ever-present challenge of security to the peaceful conduct of our elections.
Join us on Baker's Road every Thursday at 3:30 p.m.
All times, even beyond the federal season, it is the function of the state to provide security. So if we want election where people will come and express themselves freely without any fear of molestation, I think it's just a normal investment that we have security operatives around to safeguard the environment. That said, people of Edo State, as a subset of the old Midwest, for those who are familiar with our political history in Nigeria, know that we are the pacesetters in the country. And it's just as well that this time around, too, we are also the one experimenting with COVID. People of Edo State, or the old Midwest, including Delta of today, are generally repressible. For as long as justice is done and is being seen to be done, you don't expect violence in Edo State at all. And I expect this very election, the primaries, the grand finale itself in September, to also be an ample example to the nation at large. Edo State will deliver again.
Professor Bayo Aborishade, this is your final thought, on this edition of the program. What do you envisage with respect to violence in Ondo State?
Actually, I don't expect much violence in Ondo State. Ondo State has learned its lessons, and there hasn't been that much violence since 1983. But, as I said, peculiarity of the riverine area would always continue to pose a challenge. The situation with our law enforcement agencies not being able to perform their duties for whatever reasons poses the greater challenge to the elections. If there is even-handedness, the people would cooperate. But of course, we know the palliative thing would take preeminence this election period. That is given. But it all depends on how our security agencies manage.
Abuja, I was sorry to cut it short there because we're about to round off this particular program. And first of all, I would like to thank you for your time, your thought, and of course your input into the show today. Thank you very much for reaching us.
It's my pleasure.
All the way from Akure, that's the capital of Ondo State. All right, and let's also appreciate Dr. Osawaru Okunzua, public affairs analyst. We thank you for being part of our show this morning, all the way from Benin. It's been a pleasure talking to you on this show. And Ezema Wago, election observer and chairman partners for electoral reform, and the convener Say No Campaign Nigeria. Thank you for coming. And not forgetting Festus Okoye, National Commissioner and Chairman, Information and Voter Education Committee, INEC. Well, thank you for being part of the show.
Kieran, I know you're going to call for sports now. That's our last item. INEC, amongst the issues that they have listed, they said hand sanitizer, face mask. They didn't list hand washing machines and so on. You know, on Good Morning Nigeria, we have seen a number of polytechnics and even institutes develop a foot-pedaled soap dispenser and hand washer. So this would be an opportunity to patronize them.
And that's technology we're talking about.
Yes, let them supply you with those things, so that will be made in Nigeria, and that will also be in compliance with one of the executive orders.
Don't go and buy from China.
Yes.
Now let's take sports.
Nigerian-born UFC welterweight champion Kamaru Usman could be facing Irish star Conor McGregor in his next title defense. Kamaru Usman is the current UFC welterweight champion, and the fans are calling on him to defend the title against the former champion Conor McGregor in the octagon. Usman's manager Ali Abdelaziz, however, openly said his client is willing to offer the former champion a chance to have a shot at the UFC welterweight belt. Usman, who has suffered just a single defeat in 17 fights, is optimistic he will come out on top should both fighters meet, before he took to his social media handle to aim a jab at McGregor, who has also suffered just 4 defeats in 26 fights. It would be recalled that Kamaru defeated former welterweight champion Tyron Woodley via unanimous decision on March 2, 2019, in the co-main event at the UFC 235. In France, Olympique Lyon President Jean-Michel Aulas has written to the French Prime Minister and Sports Minister calling for the hasty decision to cancel the Ligue 1 season to be reversed. The campaign was brought to a premature end last month after Prime Minister Edouard Philippe announced that no sporting events would be permitted until September due to the coronavirus pandemic. Lyon missed out of a Europa League place when the Ligue 2 Football Professionnel (LFP) confirmed the final standings had been calculated on a points-per-game basis. Aulas has refused to accept the decision to wrap up the campaign, though saying playoffs could be arranged in August, while questioning the integrity of the LFP Executive Committee and warning of an economic disaster in the French game. With the Bundesliga season back up and running, while Spanish, Italian and English clubs prepare for a potential return, Aulas wants an about-turn in France.
All right, so that's it for us today on Good Morning Nigeria. We appreciate your being with us. We're back tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Stay safe and be well. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kieran. I'll see you again tomorrow.